I've got to be honest, and look, I might get into trouble for saying this, but I have serious reservations about calling Mike Graham's morning show Morning Glory.
Because it puts pictures in your mind, and then he always says at the end of his intro, he goes, "Let's get it on," and then, you know, and then you can.
Okay, David Starkey. We've seen this footage of a Labour councillor saying that we should slit the throats of far-right fascists. What do you make of that? I mean, I've kind of got mixed opinions on it, mixed emotions, simply because I think a lot of this stuff that's said in haste is not really actually trying to incite things, but this is on the worst end. He's a local councillor, he's speaking to a large group, and he says slit the throat, not, oh, I wish they'd die, or
and we've had
like
MPs murdered in this country.
And he didn't just say slit the throat, he said slit the throat.
Yes.
And the thing that is ultimately shocking, both of you, is that he was applauded to the rafters by pretty middle-class women wearing their little high-vis jackets with symbols, I think, of Amnesty International. You know, this is the sign of the absolute perversion of the left. Look at them. Just wait. Let him stop.
Yeah, so for people who are listening, we're looking at the footage. Yeah, you can see.
Let it run so that they applaud.
Yeah, there's the woman. And then at the end he goes, like a comedian goes, I'm just going to leave you like this. And then he goes, Palestine will be free from the river to the... Like, that's the standard song now for them. Which is basically racist, anti-Semitic.
But that seems like...
I mean, it's
just a
not
bunch of
simply
racists.
Let's shift to Finchley, where 20% of the population is Jewish. The equivalent peace and love demonstration said, what? Out fascists, out right-wing, out Zionists.
Zionists, yeah, I saw that.
Can you, even Labour MPs have been provoked to say this goes too far? And it is indulged. I am sure they had their negotiations with their community police officer, and he said, absolutely fine. But the more interesting thing, again, is the suppression. Did you notice, by the way, that apparently, rather strangely, there'd been a completely... nothing to worry about, but actually quite nasty little dust-up in Croydon, which, of course, have got absolutely nothing to do with anything. All the evidence points very firmly to a group of local, what do I call them, those who... march in black clothing with face masks, sometimes with sticks, who, when they didn't find anybody to beat up, just decided to beat up Croydon, which, dear me, doesn't really need being beaten up. And the press have suppressed it.
I'll tell you what I find incredibly frustrating. I mean, I've always been critical of the Met when they said that the pro-Palestine, anti-Israel march, where sort of 1 million people or whatever turned up, and regular viewers and listeners will have heard me say this before, the police officer in charge, I think his name's Matt Ward, said, we saw no examples whatsoever of anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic violence. Now, that was obviously a ludicrous thing to say about 1 million people turning up. And I'm not saying, by the way, that 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 incidents would have been enough to besmirch the whole crowd. It wouldn't have if there was 1 million. But to claim that there was not a single racist there, I think was just ludicrous. But then, of course, he came back and he said the reason why we didn't see any of these examples was because we were so busy dealing with the far-right thugs, because there was a few hundred lads beard up near the cenotaph. I worry about this, the way that the press releases seem to be pre-written, mostly peaceful protest and far-right thugs attack, whatever. And you just think to yourself, you know, why is it that one side is mostly peaceful and the other are thugs automatically, even before they do anything?
It is the division I talked about right at the beginning of our discussion. And what you'll do... Right, can we again get this straight? This, I've pointed out, it's based on the perversion of human rights laws.
Yes.
The majority against... protect the minority against the majority. It's based on the catastrophe of the Equalities Act, which goes even further in that direction. It's based on something I think even worse, that a very large part of the commentariat is actually signed up to critical race theory.
Yeah.
In other words, a black cannot be racist. They've got rather a lot of explaining to do with the scene that we saw just there. But that is the theory, and it is now inculcated. It's embedded. It runs through like the Brighton in a stick of rock. I mean, and of course, again in Brighton, you saw the complete derangement of all of this. The protests in the anti-racist protests in Brighton looked like a rerun of Pride, didn't they? And this is the lunacy of Queers for Palestine. Can you imagine what the Lovies would experience if they were actually in Palestine? They'd be grateful to be thrown off the building to stop what would be done to them. The absolute absurdity. But there's something even more fundamental. And I've argued this before, and I'm now going to say it again. What we've now forgotten something absolutely fundamental. Since the end of the Second World War, since the horrors of the Holocaust has been the absolute moral plimsoll line, right? It's been the point against which we judge everything.
Yes.
But for today's left, that will not do, because they hate Israel. So the Holocaust has got to be dethroned, and what we've got to put in its place, well, it looked as though it was going to be slavery. It's now actually Palestine. And it's this bizarre competition to be the most oppressed people ever. And what I'm astonished by, again, the terrible willful blindness of people. The Board of Deputies of British Jews is something not normally known, has an election. The election was a clean sweep for Labour.
Yes.
And the bizarre refusal of the Board of Deputies to speak out on this thing is, I think, shaming.
Yeah, it is shameful.
And where
I'm not Jewish, but the Board of Deputies, my understanding is just an organ of the political left.
It's been captured, I've heard.
But it has been. But it does speak on behalf. Sorry, again, this terrible.
It says it does.
Gentlemen, this awful business. We've divided ourselves into groups that have spokesmen. We're not just citizens. We're not just British. We're not just English. We are now particular groups.
Well, what do you think in Manchester with these two guys where there seems to be a major delay on these charges when we've all seen what's happened? What's your view on that? Is that part of the two-tier system?
Manchester Airport, that is.
Yeah, Manchester Airport.
Of course it is. And the police blethering that this is still a case under review and all the rest of it. But I think there is something else to be said there. Whatever one's feelings and mine about those two boys are about as grim as they could be, clearly one policeman lost his temper and behaved disgracefully. Stamping on somebody's head and kicking them in the head, whatever the provocation. And that again, it's one of the things we've all got to be careful about. That it's so easy to become partisan. And
David, we're gonna go to a break, but I want to talk to you after this about pubs, because on Saturday night, Danielle Nichols came up with an interesting theory. I'd love you to comment on it. More next. David, on Saturday night, my co-host, Danielle Nichols, came up with an interesting theory that I'd just love you to talk to. Maybe it's rubbish, maybe it's got nothing to it. But she said that she thinks one of the reasons why there is so much discontentment in Britain is because the pubs are far too expensive, so people can't go for a pint and go for what effectively is a sort of group therapy session for ordinary people, and are instead sat at home taking drugs and reading Twitter and getting very, very upset. Now, I've got to be honest with you, I think the loss of pubs has been damaging to Britain, but do you think it's been that catastrophic?
I'm not terribly much a pub person, and never really have been. Back in my wicked gay youth, bars yes, but pubs not really. I think certainly that what's gone wrong is that people have stopped properly talking to each other. The old vision of the pub was really sort of the heart of the community, wasn't it? It's where everybody got together, high and low, and rubbed along. And we've got fewer and fewer of those things. But I think it's not only pubs. And I think back to the world of my childhood. you know, in a northern town on a council estate, as I keep reminding everybody, my father was a tool maker, and I was born in a Pebble Dash semi-detached house.
Oh, come on! If you keep talking about being born in the council estate up north, you'll have to change your name to Darren Grimes.
Indeed, yeah. I've worn
Run, Billy, run!
I've worn much better for my age, but anyway. but all sorts of other organisations have gone. If I think back to the world that I was in, that I grew up in, most people had some sort of religious affiliation. Yeah. There were trade unions. There were friendly societies. Again, one of the things that's gone desperately wrong is the way the welfare state has consumed what used to be self-help societies. Yeah. If I look back, I'm sort of doing family history as part of my own autobiography. If I look at the lives of my parents in the 20s and 30s, by today's standards, they were desperately poor, but they were involved in organisation after organisation.
Well, David, I will tell you that when I was a kid, I was baptised in the church attached to primary school. I went to the primary school. I went to the Cubs and the Scouts that were associated with that church. You know, everybody, my mum knew all of the teachers. Well, my mum and dad knew all the teachers. And then there'd be things like the parish hall where they'd have parties and all this sort of thing. And you get the impression that life had been like that in England for quite a significant amount of time.
But why did it come to an end? Was it Thatcher and the end of society? Why did it end?
There's a great deal of it is Thatcher. I mean, there is no doubt. And of course the idiocy of the ruthlessness of Thatcher and the idiocy of the trade unions and the incompetence of so much British history, so much British industry. That destroy the reason the North is a problem. Those northern towns only ever existed. They were all villages until the 18th and 19th century. They are a creation of industrialisation. Industrialisation has gone, and they've left up these washed-up remains.
And they've been cast away, haven't they, and forgotten about?
And also terrible things have been done, especially by their local authorities. When you go back to them, the Telegraph ran a piece on Sunderland. You look at what's left of the high street. There are a few rotting teeth of buildings poking up in this wasteland of car parks and crumbling high rises. Yes. And when I go back to, which I do rarely, to Oldham, where my parents come from, there's a tiny area of the old centre left and around. It is just a wasteland. It's lunar.
Well, Sunderland, Newcastle and Durham have paid the council in Sunderland to take a lot of the immigration out from their cities into theirs.
But you see, you're putting people, the immigrants, who are rootless themselves, into communities, using that dreadful word again, that have lost their heart, their purpose, their structure, their economic function, that are disenchanted with the state. Again, there's an enormous difference between these riots and the last major ones in 2011. 2011, the fundamental origins of them was black, although there was a refusal to acknowledge that. You know, it followed the shooting by a policeman of Mark Dugan, who was a black criminal, gangster, whatever. But it was essentially shopping with violence. You were looting buildings and burning buildings, high streets. There wasn't this direct confrontation with the police. Yeah. The thing that I think is really very alarming about these is that it's the direct attack on the state. It's the direct attack on the visible emblem of the state.
Police. But the problem is with policing today. One of the big issues. And I've stolen this from Peter Blexley, so apologies if you've heard it before on the channel. But what the police do is one of two things. The National Crime Agency deal with top-level crime. And then ordinary police, all they do is they do the detective work, which is fun. And they go from domestic violence incidents and violent assault to whatever. You know, the vast majority of us used to see the police for things like car crime, for things like broken into sheds, for things like bike theft, for things like shoplifting. They've given up on all of those crimes now. And so all that happens is the police feel like a regional SS that you only see every now and again. And actually, they're a bit of a problem.
I mean, that is so true. And this is the problem, again, with Keir Starmer. Look at the words he used. A standing army. It is illegal in England to have a standing army. It has been illegal since 1689, and clearly as a lawyer, even without any history, really should know that. But this is the problem. We have had policing by consent, the great invention of Robert Peel back in the early 19th century. I think two things died over the weekend, Andre, and I'd be very interested in both of your views on that. One is the idea of policing by consent, unless you are a community. If you are a community, that is to say, you are some form of group of immigrant origin, you will be treated by negotiation with your elders. If you're white British, you won't. And in other words, you have policing by non-consent.
That's been going on years, though. It just crystallised really yesterday.
I think, David, we have to leave it there because we're running out of time. But you asked the question, and here is the answer. There is a feeling, and I think the two-tier policing is the issue here, where people say, I'm being treated to the maximum extent. I mean, what somebody said, you took the knee for Black Lives Matter, you painted your car for gay pride, and you tooled up and put on a helmet for mothers concerned about their children. I think that is the attitude, and rightly or wrongly, that is the way that people feel. Thanks so much to Dr. David Starkey